Yeah, and I do think that it is just, yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. People talk about like shifting the Overton window. Well, this is like literally changing the fabric of the whole Democratic Party.
Exactly.
And there just is no analog to this guy on the right wing right now.
Right.
There just isn't. It could have been. I mean, if we had, see, I think we should have had, it would have been, if he wasn't running, what we would want is the LP candidate to, or somebody who's like as good as like, man, like to have, I don't know, Judge Knapp or somebody, or Spike Cohen, or some, great libertarian exegete running in the Republican Party and just changing the discourse. And it probably be more, you probably could get more traction now than even Ron Paul did, just in the sense of at least changing the discourse among the candidates. Because if you have it's just the movement is bigger now, and people are hungry for some dissent against the system.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do, getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
All right, everybody, this is In Liberty and Health, and today returning to the show, one of my very dearest friends, Mr. Connor Freeman. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Great to be back.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. So we were kind of going back and forth talking about January 6th and all sorts of interesting stuff before the show. So I guess let's start with kind of like Matt Gaetz, because we were talking about that. And I think you and I probably feel very, very similar about him, where it's like you have a love-hate relationship with him. When he's good, it's like, oh my God, please just keep doing this. And then when he's bad, you just want to like grab him and shake him like, you're so good, but you're so stupid on just this like two issues.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, look, the thing with Matt Gaetz, what I really admire him for are these war powers resolutions that he's introduced, especially when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Somalia. Right now, he's just vehemently opposed to the reauthorization of Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, which authorizes warrantless, totally illegal surveillance on Americans based on if they're interacting with some sort of person, a foreigner who's been targeted by the national security state for surveillance. They can go ahead and spy on Americans. And of course, you've got hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, probably millions getting wrapped up in this even to this day. And he's, it was just this great piece in the Times that I wrote up for the Institute, where the New York Times is just excoriating. They're furious with these right-wingers who no longer want to just be staunch supporters of the mass spying state. And they're finally fed up with it. It's sort of like with Gaetz, the way he is about these endless wars. And what we're seeing, I think that's probably the best thing that's come out of that Trump era, really, is that there is now an outlet for certain parts of the right wing to have this common sense. Yeah, you know what? We hate George W. Bush, and we don't want anything to do with that legacy anymore. And so if that national security state that was built up to wage war against Muslims and Arabs and people in the Middle East and Central Asia, if that's going to continue to be used against us and continue to be used to use up our young men overseas and deprive them of their futures and deplete all of our resources here at home and all of our wealth, and restrict all of our freedoms and liberty, then we don't want anything to do with that anymore. And as long as it doesn't get to China, they're very, very good and very principled. And man, he introduced that Ukraine fatigue resolution as well, which I think speaks to so much of the sentiment of the American people right now, wondering why we're teetering on the edge of brinksmanship and spending well over $100 billion in 1 year for this proxy war of the most corrupt country in Europe. So, so they can, like Lloyd Austin says, weaken Russia and cripple their military.
Or fight to the last Ukrainian. That's another thing.
Yeah. it's fantastic to see people furious with that stuff. And I think despite his flaws, that's what Gates represents, and yeah, he represents it much better than Trump did.
Yeah, I completely agree, because Trump, and this kind of goes to like the Trump and DeSantis thing, where it's like where Trump was good, DeSantis is bad, and where DeSantis is bad, Trump is good. So like DeSantis, to his credit, is like a very, very good, decisive kind of leader. Like he knows how to get shit done. He's not afraid to hire and fire people. He's not afraid to use the government to, do what he wants to get done. Trump, on the other hand, is more aligned with us in like his rhetoric, at least. Now, obviously, I've been thinking about this a lot, because there's so many people say, "Oh, I like Trump for his foreign policy," but then you typically, like, as soon as you scratch beneath the surface, you realize they don't know anything about it.
Sure. Yeah.
But like his rhetoric was really good, and that's not something that should go unnoticed. But then, Trump couldn't, you hire John Bolton to go talk in North Korea, and then, you let your military industrial complex just walk all over you. So you kill more civilians than Obama did in 8 years and 4 years. Whereas like if you had a mix of the both, where like you had a Trump who wanted to be staunchly isolationist, who was decisive and was not afraid to kick people the fuck out of there, then you would have actually a pretty good Republican president, to be completely honest. But the problem is that you have a neocon, and it's so funny. And I like beat my head off the wall when I hear people say this. DeSantis is a neocon. He voted against Syria. Like, so we're going to focus on the one vote that he had, one vote, but the rest of them, he's not a neocon for that. But that one vote, that's the sole determining factor. Like, this shit drives me nuts. I cannot stand when people say that stuff. But yeah, and with Matt Gaetz, it is really, really good to see him speaking the way that he does, because he is very articulate, and I think that he's very much aligned with our principles, just other than China.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing about, I think when they did that vote on sanctions on Syria in the aftermath of that devastating earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria.
I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah. Gates did vote to maintain the sanctions, which was extremely disappointing. I believe the only two people that voted against that were Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when it comes to like, I think we've talked about this before, but with DeSantis in our chat, but with DeSantis, when these guys do make that point that, well, he voted against this bill in 2014 or 2013 when he was a congressman, they're completely forgetting the fact that, first of all, he cheered on airstrikes on Damascus during the Trump years. And this is a guy who does not ever say a word. In fact, none of them do. When Israel bombs Syria every single week. Killing civilians, Syrian
still
soldiers,
to this day.
Infrastructure. Oh yeah, I mean they bombed the Aleppo airport 3 separate times, rendering it inoperable 3 separate times in the wake of that earthquake, because it was a vital channel for aid, and there was no ambiguity about that at all. I mean, it was obvious to everybody, and no one says anything about that. And it's very important to note that the humanitarian crisis that has resulted from those Caesar Act sanctions, which is the most cruel, inhumane policy you could possibly think of, to essentially outlaw any entity or individual who wants to do business with the people of Syria or the government of Syria to ever help them rebuild after more than a decade of brutal war, led by the CIA, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and its allies, where they backed the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda in Iraq, which blew over into ISIS, and all the fallout from that, killing 500,000 people at least in Syria. And it's going to cost them somewhere near, in some estimates, near $500 billion to rebuild their country. But we've outlawed that. And as a result, we know from the special rapporteur on unilateral coercive measures for the UN, this lady named Alina Duhan, who does great work on Iran and Syria and the sanctions. She says she went to Syria for 12 days last year and says that 90% of their people live below the poverty line. And they have limited access to everything from transportation to healthcare to fuel to food to water to electricity. It's absolutely brutal. And we have stolen a third of their country. And that's the U.S. military occupies a third of the country in the east and takes most of their oil and wheat resources. And so it's usually couched by the America First types that we do support, at least in these endeavors, especially when they say, we want to get our boys out of harm's way and this sort of thing. But it is kind of it's almost American exceptionalist to say we're concerned about, as opposed to America first, to say instead of stepping back from this world's policeman role and allowing people to trade with countries if they want and people if they want to, and instead of interfering in that and pursuing peace and diplomacy, what we're doing and free markets, what we're doing is we're saying we're going to pull our boys out, but we're going to continue to starve these people to death and allow Israel to bomb them and Turkey to occupy sovereign territory. They're a NATO ally as well. And so that's just some devastating stuff, but it's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah, and I agree, but like I also kind of there's this weird dichotomy where I think our mutual friend Robbie Martin kind of brought this up, that like the MAGA movement has almost in a way poison pilled the anti-war movement by, it's very trendy to say you're anti-war right now for the solid fact that most people know it plays well to the base because nobody has an appetite for forever wars anymore. But like, in effect, everyone will say Trump was an anti-war candidate, but what does that mean when you didn't end any wars? You escalated a lot of them, and you escalated drone strikes, you escalated sanctions, you tore up open skies treaties, you tore up nuclear arms treaties with Iran and put heavy sanctions on a lot of countries down South America, and then almost committed to a coup in Venezuela. But he's still considered and carries the moniker of being the anti-war president. Like, that is such a... It's like you got to take the good with the bad, but it's, where do we start and where do we stop here? So
it's so funny too to see. Good. Well, it's so funny to see he tore up the Iran deal. We've known for well over 50 years now that they're verified under a safeguards agreement with the IAEA and signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty that they've never sought nuclear weapons. They don't have them. And he tears this up. Horrible, expanding sanctions, starving people, as Duhan has shown, crazy percentages of food insecurity in different parts of Iran. But now you see that even with the myriad Israeli sabotage attacks and assassinations and even drone strikes that they've been carrying out the last couple of years in Iran, and the expansion of the sanctions under Biden, and they've expanded all these military drills with Iran or with Israel showing we're ready to go to war. We'll do this. We'll do that. Israel, you get a green light. So then in the Discord leaks, they were showing that the CIA is actually concerned. They're like, wait, is Netanyahu really going to start a war because of all the shit he's dealing with domestically and how erratic he is, bombing his neighbors? He's bombing Gaza, bombing Syria, bombing Lebanon even this year.
Well, there's been a huge deal on like the West Bank recently, like one of the biggest advancements in the last like 15 years, if I remember correctly.
Oh, I think it's actually 20. Well, it's the worst attack they've done in Jenin, this northern Palestinian city in the West Bank, since 2002, where they killed well over 50 people. This time they killed 12, but they sent the bulldozers in, they sent Apache helicopters, they sent drones, they tore up all their roads. And so that you can't even drive vehicles on them now. Wow. They murdered children, and they were bombing a refugee camp in the West Bank. It's absolutely horrible when they bomb Gaza, an open air concentration camp under blockade since 2007, with 2 million people, half of whom are children, in the probably the most densely populated patch of earth on the planet. And they never let these people rebuild. 90% of their water is not drinkable. So it's brutal what they do in Gaza, but to see them bombing the West Bank with air attacks and these Apache, all this shit we fund Israel with, their apartheid army, to see that all happen was just absolutely devastating. And, God, you can watch the Hasbara in real time where they're just making shit up. They go, oh, it's Iran-backed terrorists we have to defend ourselves against. And it's pretty interesting to see that, I don't know how well that shit's going to work anymore. I mean, we were just talking the other day about how, after they murdered Shireen Abu Akleh, an American Palestinian Christian journalist,
with a press vest on.
Yeah, shot her in the head, and it's on video. And then to see Biden, Israel's man in Washington, go to Israel, and that's I believe it was in July, to go there 2 months later and say our ties with Israel are bone deep, no matter what. I don't care what anybody says. And this is who the Biden administration is. I mean, Israel has been going completely out of control since Biden came into office. And so right now, that Iran deal, the interim deal that they're working on, it turns out we have Western officials talking to the media saying that, the reason we're doing this is because we think Netanyahu might actually start a war with Iran. So now they've got to go back and do what they did before, which is to try and take that off the table by saying, we have a deal in place, but politically they can't do the JCPOA. But Netanyahu he's ramped up the strikes in Syria, doubled them, and the West Bank. They've killed nearly 200 Palestinians this year already in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you probably recall seeing some of our fellow libertarians saying that, Biden, I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. Biden was going to hand Iran $3 billion or something like that. No,
yes.
They're going to go right back into the Iran deal. It's like, no, dude, you have no idea. And like Biden himself said, I want to say it was probably 20 or 30 years ago. He said, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist too. Like this is, like you said, this is who Biden is. He's not some, Democrat, anti-Semitic. He's not like Rashida Tlaib or any member of the squad who's like, kind of okay on Israel if you just take like a surface look at it. No, he's like he's a credit card company's guy who's going to do whatever Netanyahu tells him to do. He's the status quo.
Yeah, and I'm only laughing because the squad's like opposition to Israel is so tepid compared to like our guys in the libertarian movement,
Yeah.
And yet they're considered like they have to lie about them, and they'll be like, she's an anti-Semite, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And Biden, he's got stock lines that he's been using forever, but he believes them. I mean, he said multiple times that the thing about it, there was this part, one of them is where he's at an AIPAC event and he goes, my father told me you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And he slams his hand on the podium and he goes, Israel is essential for the security of world Jewry. He said we would have to invent Israel if it didn't already exist to protect her interests, which doesn't make any sense. And then of course he also says there's no apology to ever be made about Israel. It's the best investment we make every year. Very actually similar to Lindsey Graham saying that the funding the Ukraine proxy war is the best money we've ever spent. It's this same kind of mentality. And, Biden, it's fascinating to see that because it should actually the America First people should step back and ask, why were all of Trump's worst, most hawkish, in some cases unprecedented policies regarding Israel, why were none of them changed once Biden came into office, only ever expanded? They never think about that.
What's the deal with the tariffs, the sanctions, even in South America and over China, everywhere really? Like it's so funny to me that like Biden really is just blue MAGA. Like a lot of the policies are the exact same. And I think this is kind of where people get lost just because like they're so binary in the way they look at politics and they don't understand like this is just the momentum of our government. It's not like there's going to be changes in rhetoric, but like what they want and how they're going to dictate foreign policy all over the world is just going to continue pretty much no matter what. Did you have something else to add? Because I want to ask you about RFK. I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch, but I really want to get to RFK too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I would just say, and we're going to get to it with RFK too. It's he's expanded Biden has expanded the China policies that you're talking about with Trump, and that's another thing. I mean, so much of Trump was really sort of the transition period into the new Cold War era. And you still can see very clearly that Israel, no matter who's in power, has to be obeyed in a sense because of the power of the Israel lobby. And it's very, I always thought that once the American right, I wish I could give them all enough already. Scott's book or Fool's Errand, and just get them to read that first chapter because it's so important for them to realize, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but my father was supposed to be on Flight 175 on the day of 9/11, but changed his plans 2 weeks beforehand.
Wow.
And I grew up on the right. I grew up with Fox News on in the house in the wake of 9/11, thinking that I knew people who were in the military, and I thought, well, we're kicking ass, and we're a stronger country for it. We got attacked by these barbarians. I don't know why, but they hate us. Obviously they hate us. But when I figured that out, I mean, it was when I first started learning about the Israel policy. I always thought that light bulb moment would happen with other people, because it is, if my father had died that day, and really for all the kids who lost their fathers and brothers and sisters and mothers and aunts and uncles that day, it really was at the heart of it as a result of U.S. support for Israel, their occupation and apartheid state and oppression of the Palestinians and mass murder of the Palestinians, and their war on southern Lebanon, which the U.S. supported and killed 20,000 people. Just absolutely brutal. And so if they can figure that out, we'd be so much further ahead now than we are. But
yeah, well, just as well as I do, the MAGA rights downfall normally is Israel, China, Iran, and most of them are pretty bad on South America too. Like, to bring it back to Matt Gaetz, kind of upsetting to see someone like him, who I've sang his praises relentlessly. And it's funny when I, share an article from Caitlin Johnstone, everybody jumps on my ass. But though, as soon as I share something from Matt Gaetz, it's like crickets. Nobody gives a fuck. But, I share this cat lady communist from Australia, her articles, because she's spot on her diagnosis there. It's just dumb.
Caitlin is heroic.
Yes.
Despite anything she gets wrong from a libertarian perspective, I absolutely adore her. She is one of my favorite writers, and could not be more supportive of us at antiwar.com and Libertarian Institute. And I just, man, she's great.
All right, guys, we are going to take a quick break from the show to tell you about the show's sponsor. We are now brought to you by Fox & Sons Coffee. As you can see right here, I got the Den Blend Dark. Really enjoy that. I've been drinking a lot of their Brazil honey prep right here. As you can hear, there's not a lot of beans left in it because I've been drinking it quite a bit. Just to tell you a little bit about Fox & Sons, why I support them and why you should too, is that Stephen had started the company up in Michigan to help teach his son about entrepreneurship. I'm all about that, and I do firmly believe that in order to spread liberty in our lifetimes, we have to support those who support similar values as us. And Stephen does support all the same libertarian values that I bring and talk about on the show a lot. So go to foxandsons.com, use code Kyle at checkout to get 15% off of orders $25 or more, and there's always free shipping whenever you place an order that is more than $37.99. Find their coffee absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure you will too. So one more time, go to foxandsons.com, use code Kyle at checkout to get yourself a little discount. Let them know I sent you, and support the coffee that supports you. All right, guys, thanks. Back to the show. It's so great. It just drives me nuts when people can't set some bullshit down and just realize hey, this lady's not going to hide under your bed and put a Glock in your mouth when you're sleeping. That's like what some people think. But to see someone like Matt Gaetz saying that we should give Joe Biden military authority to do a drone strike in Cuba over a listening post that's been there for 20 years, come on, man. You are so much better than this. Go have a conversation with Thomas Massey, right? You follow Dave DeCamp. Shoot him a message. Just say, hey, man, what's going on here? Just ask him a question. You and I know that Dave would answer in a heartbeat and tell him, hey, this is what's going on. But come on.
Well, so much of the China stuff to me is so funny because I wrote a piece about this recently. It's a long story, but I was writing something about why we shouldn't decouple with China. And it dawned, I mean, I've felt this way for a long time, but I finally put it down on paper. All those arguments and all those China hawks and all those people who swallow up all that shit, they do not understand how close we are to war with China. They do just have no fucking idea. Right. They don't know that Obama launched the largest military buildup since World War II, and we've been expanding it ever since, encircling China for future war. And every week, as you know and cover, every week it gets worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And Biden has dwarfed Trump in terms of his escalations. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that you're going to decouple, or Vivek Ramaswamy says, we're cutting China off, it's a funny way of putting it, but yeah. So
what are we gonna do? They're they're thousands of miles away.
Yeah,
how are we gonna cut them off?
He's ordinarily I wouldn't say Taiwan is a national security issue, but because of the chips, because of the semiconductor, and as we pointed out, It's a foregone conclusion on a bipartisan basis. Seth Moulton, the Democrat from Massachusetts, the U.S. Army War College and their documents, and Robert O'Brien saying it's scorched earth, motherfucker. We're blowing those up as soon as that war starts. So it has nothing to do with chips. Go deregulate our fucking economy and build them yourself, Vivek. If that's what you want to do.
And my point with this has always been China is so reliant on imports, and especially with their population, when you learn about the demographics, like they're starving there. So imagine if they go after Taiwan and they nationalize the chips, they already have to import a ton of food, and they've already overestimated like their good, healthy working population in the ages of like 20 to 40 by 100 million, right? I mean, it is bad. So now imagine you have a ton of older people who are already in pretty rough shape because it's like 30% of their population is diabetic from malnutrition. No, those people are starving because the whole world already hates China. And then you nationalize the chips, which everybody needs, and you're an importer of your food. So now your entire population that's already diabetic and already hates your government for the one-child policy is starving, malnourished, and pissed off because they have no food. Yeah, like in any reality, does this sound like a good idea? Like countries will generally act in their self-interest, and nationalizing the chips for China to use to give to their poor population, like none of this makes sense when you step back and think about it for 2 seconds.
No, and I think to be honest, I mean, and I'm sure you agree at this point, you know, watching this stuff for years, that they also the American policymakers are really dumb. But the ones who started this shit and at the top, I assume they know all of that. And I believe China is still the world's greatest food importer. And this war over Taiwan is the last thing China wants. The last thing China wants. And it's shit. It's really not even. It's the Democratic Progressive Party. It's the hawkish. It's the hawkish separatist, the pro-separatist, pro-independence forces, the radical factions that for the longest time. We had a policy internally called dual deterrence of clamping down on that as an ancillary to strategic ambiguity and the one-China policy, making sure that, look, China doesn't make a move because they don't know what we may or may not do, but also we tell them, and we'll literally, Gareth Porter has that great article at the Gray Zone from, I believe, 2021, all about how Obama really did change this at the end of his administration. But for the longest time, we would interfere and let them know in Taipei that we don't support this guy or this woman. We are not in this party. We are not getting involved with one of these pro-independence factions. And if they do come to power, it's like it's a big deal that America lets everybody know this is not. We're not going this route. Okay. You need to control yourselves. And basically, you know, I mean, we've kept the peace for this longest time. China is Taiwan's greatest trading partner. These people are kin. There's absolutely no reason China would want to do this and isolate themselves on the world stage. You know, and it is interesting to see too, at the same time, to see as the U.S. gets more and more as they shift toward the Indo-Pacific and they shift toward Eastern Europe this is really the fruition of the Wolfowitz doctrine, that at the end of the day, what it really amounts to is we probably will go to war with China if these people have their way, or if they don't change course very, very soon. And certainly with Russia, we're trying to destroy their country. We're trying to cripple them, to dismember Russia. But at the same time, in the Middle East, what is China doing? China's going in and making peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And now we see Syria being brought back in from the cold. And these countries are going to be defying sanctions, I'm sure. I mean, the fact that they got the Saudi Arabian, Jordanian, Iraqi, Emirati, and Egyptian foreign ministers to have that meeting in Amman, Jordan, where they called for all foreign forces to leave Syria, you know, this is like the multipolar moment encapsulated, you know, the unipolar moment being over. And that is tremendous to see. But I think it speaks to the difference between China's role in the world and America's role in the world.
Right. It's almost like that Thucydides trap kind of deal, which I know people overplay that, but you know, it's people want to throw stones at China, but like I remember this saying, and I've repeated this a few times, that like America goes places with bombs and China goes with a briefcase. Now, I think both are nefarious, but I mean, I think I'd rather have somebody present me a suitcase with a loan I'm going to default on versus getting my, house and family blown to pieces. Now, something else that I heard talked about is that China, a lot of their soil actually needs like a lot of fertilizer to have any like productive harvest. So that would explain why they want to end the war in Ukraine, because Ukraine has a lot of, fertilizer and a lot of stuff to kind of help with what China needs. So, it kind of makes sense that, Russia or Ukraine are going to kind of start to pony up to China versus the US. I mean, yeah, the US is handing out the gravy train, but like, if China can do the same thing, then, might want to consider your options here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to see the American response to the 12-point peace plan, which was released in March, to see them just become livid at the idea that China would attempt to intervene here and present a deal which would have a ceasefire, an end to sanctions, a humanitarian response, and saying that, look, we believe in the sovereignty of all nations. We don't believe in these Cold War blocs. We condemn the sanctions and this sort of Cold War mentality, taking these swipes at the U.S. But like that is, we've got Indonesia, we've got Brazil, we've got that whole African coalition that is trying to make peace. I mean, so much of the world wants this war to end. And it's really the US and Europe out on a limb right now. And of course, the European population is turning against this faster than the Americans are, especially in places when you see like tens of thousands of people protesting in Germany and in Italy and in France. And it's incredible to see that, for Blinken to come out and say we're absolutely opposed to ceasefires and negotiations, and then have Sullivan come out and say, oh yeah, no, bomb Crimea, please. Those weapons that we're giving you, you can use them with Crimea. We don't think that's Russian territory. That's Ukraine. And to have him come out and say, they are so. And when you see in the Times, they're like, we're shrugging this off, neo-Nazis with American weaponry, armored vehicles, and NATO rifles going into Belgrade and killing, attacking Russian civilians. Whatever. Drone strikes in Moscow. Yeah, we know it's them. But who cares? It's hilarious. It's terrifying. But this is really showing that I think that China, like you're saying, is playing a role where they're coming in and trying to. It's really a pro-capitalist approach to try and make, to have business with all these other countries. That's why in the Middle East, that's why these countries are moving toward, they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into the Middle East. The bilateral trade volume between the Arab world and between China, and they just cut another $10 billion series of business deals with Saudi Arabia worth $10 billion. And it's just. What do we have to offer? We have to offer, well, we'd like to build a sort of like NATO-style coalition against Iran with Israel and us at the top. And then maybe we could have a massive war. It's like that's the worst possible thing you could offer that region. And when it sort of epitomized when Blinken went to speak in the wake of all of this, went to speak at that GCC foreign ministers meeting in Saudi, and he opens by saying, I want you all to normalize relations with Israel. It's just they have no, and it's like McGovern used to say, like or Ray McGovern would say, by June of 2021, Biden's saying to reporters, and I told Putin she wants to take over the world, and they're going to press you, and you need to, we can help you. And so, out of touch and just completely run by the military industrial complex. And, Max Blumenthal gave that great speech at the UN showing that all of them. I think I even underestimated this to begin with, but you could see when they were all pouring in from Center for a New American Security. And in the case of like Antony Blinken from West Exec Advisors and Avril Haines and her connections to all of that. These are just people that are just bankrolled by the military industrial complex. And so their whole policy reflects that. And so, that's why I think that and even we've seen, speaking of China, we've seen those reports where it comes out where they are speaking to China a bit more and trying to show themselves as being willing to talk, even if
to
they
manage
don't
manage competition.
Right, and to manage perception too, because they're concerned. It was admitted in this Bloomberg piece that officials were saying, "Look, the real reason we're doing this is because our allies in Asia and Europe are going, what the hell are you guys doing?" Because they figure that it looks like we are just escalating to the point of crisis and being very cavalier about it.
Well, yeah. So this is a really, really interesting point, actually, because so now I'm a little rusty on these details with India, but we've talked about it a little bit where there were those border disputes between China and India, where people are like fist fighting with sticks and stuff and falling off the mountains on the border of India and China. And then I can't remember the president of India or whatever the heck he is. Modi, that's it. He was having talks with the U.S. as well. So I know we've obviously covered a lot about the whole military buildup around China, kind of in the Indo-Pacific, but this is on the other side, if I understand, or if I remember correctly. So, what's going on with India? Because it seemed like, if I recall correctly, Modi was kind of iffy about it, but he's starting to kind of move towards the U.S. now.
Well, one of the things that they're talking about, which they would, how they're turning Australia into an all-service, full-service hub for all submarine activities.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Where they want to be able to have, maintain and build submarines. It's also sort of ancillary to AUKUS. What they're trying to do with India is make it a similar sort of hub for the maintenance, re-equipping of naval vessels and warplanes. And so this is one of the deals that they're working on with India as well. And they're working with shipping yards. And I believe Dave just wrote up a piece about this at antiwar.com. But right now, they're trying to, this is all part of the Quad. I just saw Biden talking about this on when he was talking to Fareed Zakaria. And, the way they frame it is, we're not doing this to surround you. We're doing this because we believe in a free and open Indo-Pacific and all this. And so
we're installing a prison right around you. But believe me, you will have a key. By the time this is done, you will have a key. I promise.
Yeah, exactly. Just speaking like a complete serial killer or something. And so with India, it is interesting because I was curious to see how they would respond to this. We'll have to see how it plays out, of course, because we have significantly upgraded the level of intelligence cooperation with them, and it's been revealed that we were doing so even at the time of those clashes in the Himalayas in 2020. And India has not played ball with the sanctions blitz on Russia, very importantly, and so it'll be interesting to see how much they play along with the buildup against China. I don't think it's certainly not in the interest of India to get too involved in turning their whole country into to have it so that the whole anti-China coalition, the whole U.S.-led coalition is going to be stationing military equipment and sailors and airmen and warplanes and warships over there. That sounds like a bad idea. It sounds like bad for business, obviously. And I don't know how they're going to play it, but I do know that there is a huge appetite. We've heard the Hawks talk about this, that they envision India not only being a part of that coalition, but being almost like a replacement for all the business that we do with China. They would like to turn India into like the new China. And
so this is actually really, really interesting. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but India actually has, I believe, I read this somewhere, I think they have the highest vegan population, and they also have the lowest life expectancy out of any country in the world, if I remember correctly. They're not a very, very prosperous country. So when you think about this kind of on a meta level, and especially now that you said they're kind of trying to build India up maybe as a new China, this actually makes a lot of sense when you kind of consider that, because that's kind of like what we did with China, right? We normalized with China back with not Nixon, or was it Nixon? I can't remember.
Carter, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we normalized with China back then, and then they kind of became a superpower. Now, I don't know how much I put stock into Peter Zeihan stuff, but China's very, very debaucherous with their numbers, with their population. He's saying by 2030, it's not going to be good at all, and then by 2050, their population is going to be halved. That's pretty bodacious, but as everybody knows that reads anything on China, they're not doing well, but like everything looks good. So kind of in that same vein, it's almost like India is in a similar position where if we normalize with them, and then if we do what you're saying, as in give them this huge military buildup, then that's going to allow them to have like a greater GDP, and then maybe they start industrializing a little bit more, and then maybe they become kind of like the next big player on the world stage. Does that, like, that's complete total speculation, but it honestly makes sense.
That I believe that is some factions see that as a viable strategy, and we should see. I mean, I think it remains to be seen how, like I said, how far India is willing to go in this buildup, especially because the Australians are out of their minds when it comes to this stuff. I mean, the way they talk about it is like, yeah, America's going to go to war with China, and we're going to be on America's side during that war. And we're ready. We're getting, bring your B-52s, bring your submarines, bring everything you got, bring your troops. We'd love to be involved. And like Caitlin Johnstone's always showing just the shocking level of war propaganda. It's like right after 9/11 level scaremongering and war fever against China over there. I don't know exactly as much about how India's population looks at all of this. And I should really learn more about how they talk to their population about potential conflict with China. Now, they are a part of the Quad, but I don't know how strong the Quad really is. Certainly with Japan and Australia, they're on board with a lot of this buildup. And it's also against North Korea as well in the case of Japan. They have that trilateral military pact with South Korea. And the Japanese are, going to be doubling their military budget, and they're going to be cooperating extensively with the U.S., eyeing China the whole way. And so that's all very escalatory. But I wonder if they're really going to be able to pull off this idea with India, where they would like to have it to be that much of almost turn into this sort of giant naval base. I'm not sure if they can actually realistically get away with that, so we'll have to see. But yeah, it would be if they do, that's going to be a real big deal.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that I'm going to have to start doing some digging on then, because I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that. I've only heard it recently because of the recent meetings. So kind of on to they're having the NATO meetings, Vilnius right now, literally like as we're talking. Did you hear anything about anything that's going on over there?
I know that no, I've got to catch up actually, but I know that France is saying that they're going to be sending over their own version called Scalp, air-launched cruise missiles of the Storm Shadows that the British have already sent over. Kyle just wrote up a piece about that for the Institute with, these are, air-launched cruise missiles have a range of over 150 miles, greater range than any weapon system the U.S. has transferred so far. And I think, they've announced that they're dropping the requirement for a membership action plan. So which doesn't really mean anything in practice. If they're not, it does mean something in the sense that it's showing that like we are really, we're still like bringing Ukraine into NATO. That's still our plan. But Biden has said like, first of all, we can't do that until the war is over. We're not going to bring Ukraine into NATO under any circumstances if the war is still ongoing. And two, they've got a lot of problems with their so-called democracy. That's essentially what he said. And that was always the excuse for not bringing them in the first place, was because of the corruption issues and all these sorts of things. But no, I have to double check and see what else is going on. I was just doing some catch up, but I need to catch up on the news actually out of those meetings. I'm not sure if did Zelensky show up?
No, I haven't paid close attention either, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. It seems like they keep throwing this NATO bid out for Ukraine. I kind of doubt that it's going to happen because I feel like this conflict's going to continue to drag on. I heard somebody that I listened to who's kind of completely out of like the foreign policy world. He said that Ukraine's winning the war. And to me, that doesn't seem obvious at all. It seems like Russia's like slow, like if you had to put a percentage on it, to me, and you would know much, much better than I do, but it seems like Russia's like 60% winning and then Ukraine's like 40% losing. So like it's a fucking struggle because the whole world's kind of coming to Ukraine's defense, but Russia has just endless people to throw at the problem in hopes that they're going to finally kind of move on. But then obviously, we're sending them cluster bombs this week, which were outlawed all over the world, which I know that's going to change a lot of shit up, and that's going to make the war a lot bloodier. So yeah, I guess kind of what's the latest with Ukraine in that respect?
Well, it's I mean, they've already lost 20% of their country. And I mean, we're talking about if you're talking about the Luhansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson, and I mean, I don't know exactly what to believe as far as casualty numbers, but it is top American and European officials were saying before the end of last year that there's more than 100,000 killed and wounded on the Ukrainian side, plus tens of thousands of more civilians who have been killed. And again, that's all a result of the U.S. encouraging attacks on civilian infrastructure, particularly with respect to Crimea, the Kerch Bridge being the best example, because Russia had not launched their large-scale strategic bombing of civilian infrastructure until that point. And certainly, the fact that we continue to send longer range weapon systems, which I think reeks of desperation. Same thing with the cluster bombs, because they're even admitting that, well, we're doing this because we don't have any ammo left to send over. Neither does Ukraine. And Stoltenberg has been very upfront about this, that they cannot realistically equip Ukraine with the level of ammunition at the rate that they're expending it, the entire alliance. And so they're sending cluster bombs. They're preparing to send, or at least it's reported in the Wall Street Journal that they're looking at sending the Army tactical missile systems, which have a range of nearly 200 miles. And those are going to be used for attacks inside the Russian mainland. They're going to be used for attacks inside Crimea. That's what Michael McCall and all these congressional hawks want. And so to see us escalating the war that much more, sending over the tanks and getting ready to give them training them on F-16s and the Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and depleted uranium munitions for the Challenger 2 tanks and all this escalation, which in the depleted uranium, they look at that like it's a dirty bomb. And now we're sending cluster bombs, which are going to be killing people for decades and generations. Right. It reeks of a callousness and a desperation. And I think we're seeing that, especially with Bakhmut, just tens of that. I don't think we have any realistic idea. I don't believe Prigozhin's numbers when he says it's like 20,000 Russians dead and 50,000. This was 8 months of just what they were called the meat grinder. We know from people who were there that, Americans is a part of the so-called International Legion, saying that we're on the front lines. The average life expectancy is about 4 hours. Right. And that it's just Russian artillery day and night ripping people apart. And so, with the conscription policy there, with, men between the ages of 18 and 60, you're not allowed to leave the country. And the fact that the counteroffensive is not going well, there is no real territorial gains to speak of, nothing significant anyway. And they don't seem to be able to penetrate the Russian defensive lines, let alone even, they're not penetrating them and they're not really getting too close to them either. It's just, and you can read in like the Times and the Post where they interview these European officials who will speak candidly, as long as they're, especially if they're speaking under the condition of anonymity, that what they're doing is essentially a suicide mission. They talked up about how, we trained them in these NATO countries and they know our tactics and they're using our weapon systems. And, they were bragging that this counteroffensive is being led by essentially a de facto NATO army, but they're getting killed. And I'm not to say that the Russians are having a smashing success, but we keep hearing more and more, even from Western officials, that we think this is headed toward a stalemate. But in practice, I think what that means is you're going to have who knows? I mean, honestly, I'm not an alarmist about casualty numbers, but I would not be shocked if it's if we're talking about hundreds of thousands between the two sides that have died already. So, I don't see Ukraine winning. I see them only losing more territory, because one of the things that, first of all, as you're talking about with the Vilnius summit, this hype about having an Israel model, all that does is incentivize Russia to not negotiate, and B, take more territory. And the longer range weapon systems we send, as Lavrov has explained, they will take more territory to protect their people who are under their protection in Ukraine and the Russian population. And so, if they want to continue to have NATO forces on the ground there and training and training their military and providing the intelligence and sending over more and more military aid, it's just going to mean that the Russians are going to have to take more and more of the country. And, even putting that on the table, that we can have this Israel model and upgrade our cooperation and their integration with NATO, even if it's not official membership. They are already a de facto member of NATO. That's why the war started, because the Americans just circumvented the process of actually going through and having each member state's parliament vote for it. They just did it on a bilateral basis through the Pentagon and the State Department. But to go with this Israel model thing, if they're saying, like Biden is, that this only can happen if there's a ceasefire or some kind of peace settlement, then that means the Russians have just absolutely no reason to even entertain negotiations, because it's just going to be that much more of a problem. And so we're back at why we're in the war in the first place.
It's insane to me, because it's like, the more and more I listen to like you and Dave talk about Russia's perspective, it's literally like they've been reasonable the entire time. And like, don't get me wrong, Putin, the way that they're slaughtering people over there, it's fucking horrifying. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, how long can you poke the dude in the eyes until he starts to swing back? And that's really what it's been. And when he swings back, he swings a lot harder than we poke him in the eyes. And this is all just done at the Ukrainian people's behest, essentially. Where like, it's the Ukrainian people who are going to suffer the most. Like the US, we're going to feel inflation and stuff like that. But I mean, that pales in comparison to literal hundreds of thousands of people just getting slaughtered indiscriminately. And now, like we've said, with cluster bombs, there's going to be people dying for decades to go on, because you don't see these mines. You step on one, next thing you know, you're gone. Like, this shit is insane.
And I have a hatred for Josh Rogan, Bill Kristol's protege, writes his column at the Washington Post, and I just wrote a piece about his calling for regime change in Syria and how he had these activists go and meet him at some Maryland private fundraiser, and they got Biden to say Assad must go and all this, and they want tighter, stronger sanctions and all this. Well, then the next piece that he had written, I think, was this whole thing about cluster bombs, where he was defending it. And he goes, look, this is the Ukrainians' choice, not ours, basically. Like, it's up to them. Like, first of all, no, it's not. We don't outsource our U.S. foreign policy to this corrupt government we're using in a proxy war. It's not like saying Saddam is making all the decisions back at home during the Iran-Iraq war in D.C. You're like, get Saddam on the phone. Can we do this? Is that all right? Is that okay, Mr. Hussein? Like, that's not how it works. And also, the Kiev regime does not represent the people of that country.
Right.
And I think that's going to be painfully clear to us in the future, because some of the people that I know, or know people who know people in Ukraine, despise them. I mean, people are terrified of of being rounded up for conscription for that draft, to go into that meat grinder. And it's, there's those reports that come out in the Wall Street Journal where you're talking about, these are people's brothers, uncles, and fathers and sons.
Right.
And they are poor people who work in factories, people who do, shift work, or people who work at, or do, sort of, freelance work, or they're just people who just pick up odd jobs and these sorts of things. Maybe they have military experience, probably they don't, or if they do, it's from decades ago. And now they're being thrown into the front line with no ammo, no support, no, and they, some of these kids they talk to, they talk to like a commander or a sergeant who says that I've got people who are scared of the sound of their own guns. They don't even know how to fight, and they're just standing there getting murdered. And yeah, I mean, geez, wave the flag all you want here at home in DC and talk shit on Twitter. Like you're saying, it's about, yes, Putin is absolutely he's conducting this war in a brutal fashion. It never needed to happen if it wasn't for this US policy and this NATO policy. And the fact is, it's like throwing in people who don't really know how to fight against someone like Mike Tyson, just going to beat the hell out of them. And you keep shoving them back into the ring. And just counting money the whole time. Like, it's something sick, what we're doing with Ukraine. And, of course, we hear from Cy Hirsch that Zelensky and members of his government. It's just like, who can profit the most off of this? It's just it's going to be a massive scandal.
Yeah.
When
I mean,
more of that
Zelensky
breaks through with they're sending off arms into the black market, in the international black market, driving around in Mercedes and all kinds of stuff in Kiev. I mean, it's going to be this is a fucking stain on American history. Like, like up there with the worst things we've done.
It's insane to when you hear Zelensky talk about the way that he's receiving aid. It's just so insane to me. I remember hearing Dave talk about it a couple months ago when he said Biden pretty much said you have to be a little bit more grateful for all this aid. Like, the fact you would have to say that to another country, does no one realize how insane this is? That we're literally telling the president of another country that we just handed $100 billion, that you should be just a little bit more grateful. Like, the fact that even is a conversation at all should be like you ringing the bell here. Like, what the hell are we doing when people are just getting slaughtered indiscriminately? And they're losing ground, and people are just making money. And like you said, the officials in the government are like, oh yeah, well, we're going to go drive in our Mercedes and hang up a new air freshener and go to our houses up in the hills.
Zelensky said he wanted to turn Ukraine into a big Israel. So, I mean, if that's your role model, that's your lodestar, I think that makes total sense. That kind of behavior. I mean, the Israelis kill Americans and then demand money.
Yep.
They don't even have to demand it. It's sort of like Ukraine. If you don't support aid to this apartheid state or this corrupt government that persecutes Christians and outlaws opposition and nationalizes media and conscripts people and throws them into a completely losing battle just for saving face, essentially, and to make money and to keep up this charade, this Potemkin village going. I mean, it's amazing. They're going to pass some other massive military aid package.
Yeah.
I think all this sort of accounting stuff, when they go, oh, we messed up, we've got an extra $6 billion. What do you think about that? Or we've got an extra $1 billion.
Yeah, let's round up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think they're just sort of buying time because I think it's politically more difficult than it was, but I do think they're going to pass it. And you can see it when they're about to pass a approximately $900 billion NDAA, and we hear Republicans saying, I need emergency funding, supplemental funding for Ukraine, for China, for Taiwan, for additional military spending. It's like the most corrupt, disgusting thing to see. And they are going to use that as a way to, we'll be using supplemental funds to back Ukraine, and they're going to say we need to do the same thing with Taiwan. So it's just going to blow it up to $1 trillion, not counting all the other ancillaries very soon. But it's not going to end. And I think they believe, who knows what's going to happen with Biden, actually, because it's funny to see these reports come out where people are going, the guy's a real asshole back, behind the scenes in Axios this week. I thought that was hilarious. Yeah. But they also have said that they see this as like, if we lose this war, that would be a horrible political kick in the balls for the Biden administration and for their reelection chances. And so they don't care. It's just about keeping up appearances and Slava Ukrainia and all this. And they're going to kill. They don't care how many people die. I mean, that's so obvious about all this. It's the same thing with Taiwan. Turn it into a giant weapons depot, and you and him go fight kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. They do talk about Taiwan in a very different fashion, like they will go to hot war. I'm praying that they are not that stupid, but either way, the biggest victims of that are going to be the Taiwanese.
Absolutely.
If it goes down, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of on one last question, because I want to be respectful of your time. RFK. I want to give my quick spiel on it because a lot of people have thrown rocks my way for celebrating RFK. And it's like, the problem is, kind of like you said earlier, nobody understands how important it is to be good on China. Nobody understands how important that one issue is. And he's good on it. He's the only presidential candidate that is literally saying they're an economic competitor and we should win that. The only one. Every single other candidate, they're like, we need to build up. We need to build up in the Indo-Pacific. China's the number one threat. They're, the Uyghur genocide, the genocide Olympics, the chips. They have all this stuff, and he's the only one that's good. Is he awful on welfare? Is he awful on climate change? Is he a Democrat? Yes. But my God, he's the best fucking Democrat that's ran in like 20 years. And he's actually good on like a sizable chunk of issues that matter to us. Yes, he's awful on welfare. And unfortunately, he's bad on Israel and Iran.
Oh, yeah.
But like everywhere else that, I'm kind of referring to here, he's pretty fucking solid. And is he going to win? Probably not. But like, let's all hone in on this and realize this is a big fucking moment, because this gives the left a chance to have the same voice that the right now has in Trump, except for, RFK, in my opinion, I think is a little bit more strong footed. He's pivoted on some stuff, but I think he's a little bit more intellectually honest, curious, and he's a little bit more up to date with stuff, and he actually knows stuff. He's not just throwing out, brand management like Trump does. Like RFK actually knows things. So yeah, go ahead. Your thoughts on RFK?
Well, all right, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled with the show's new sponsor. I am now sponsored and have an affiliate through LMNT electrolytes. I've used these electrolytes for years. Back when I used to do a lot of fasting, in fact, I used to drink, sometimes I want to say up to 7 a day, 7 little packets. So the packets are full of all the electrolytes you need to perform and hydrate yourself properly. You need sodium for pretty much every single function in your body, despite what a lot of people may tell you. Sodium doesn't actually cause a lot of the issues that people kind of would have you believe. So just real quick to give you a little bit of facts. You don't need sugar to hydrate. Electrolytes and water don't require glucose to pass through the gut. The average American consumes over 60 pounds of sugar a year. And when it comes to athletic performance, you can actually lose up to 7 grams per day in hot climate. So make sure you click on the affiliate link below to get all your hydration needs. And like I said, I'm super stoked to have these guys teamed up with the podcast, and just make sure you get your electrolytes through Element. All right, guys, thanks.
I hate to sound sort of naive or just overly optimistic, but I do think that there is something about him that, despite his flaws, would be very good for the country. If he was to have a Democrat who has this much crossover with the American right and with libertarians and doesn't play into kind of sectarian, the affirmative action thing is another problem. But I was going to say sort of this woke racial antagonism of splitting up the country and playing us off against each other, and basically being sort of the Democratic Party leadership largely act like race pimps at this point. And they really do. I mean, it's horrible to see. And there's so much, I think a lot of people don't like to talk about this, and I don't do it that much myself, certainly not, in my writing or podcasting typically, but there is a huge problem with sort of the acceptance of like anti-white rhetoric and racism, or just the treatment of Asians by certain groups. This kind of gets brushed under the rug, and we do live in this kind of woke world where certain groups are elevated above others, and it is kind of like the oppression Olympics or something, right? And in the meantime, all kinds of horrible crimes are ignored and abuses that are carried out against groups that, because some groups don't matter as much, to borrow a phrase. And so that can be very troubling. I don't think Kennedy plays into that at all. I think Kennedy actually, there's an opportunity there for there to be some kind of a heal of the divide, especially after the horrible, horrible legacy of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, because that 1-2 punch, I think, destroyed our social fabric, maybe irrevocably, and probably irrevocably, between the Iraq War and all of Obama's crimes and the whole war on terror and the national security state and torture, and making it so that half the country hates the other half because you what do you mean you want to close Gitmo, you son of a bitch, like that kind of thing. Plus Obama just exploiting all of our really he was promoting this culture war thing. I mean, or his surrogates in the media, and turning people against each other. And And then it just blew up in the Trump era, really, too. It gets blamed on him, but it was really a culmination of so many things.
Yeah.
I think that Kennedy could be really good for that. His China policy, I think, and I've said this, I think is enough to vote for him. And I've never voted for president, ever. And so, you know, he said, and I got this in my piece I wrote for the Ron Paul Institute. Liam McCollum, the great Liam McCollum, transcribed this from that Twitter space. It says, let's recognize the reality. So Tulsi Gabbard asked him, is war with China necessary? And he said, let's recognize the reality that China is a very ambitious nation. It does want to compete, but the reality is it doesn't want to compete with us militarily. China is still relatively poor compared to the United States. I think we should be competing with them on an economic platform, not a military one. I'm not frightened by China. That kind of competition would be good for the whole world. It would be a collaborative competition, if you will. China does not want war with us. We were told after the Cold War period that we get a peace dividend. We never got that peace dividend. We now spend more on our military than the next 10 countries in the world. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We should be de-escalating. We should be talking with China, for God's sake. We haven't talked with them in 5 years. Any talks with China should not be about military swaggering. The Chinese have been doing a lot better than us because they've been projecting economic power abroad. Why are we trying to create a war with China? Why are we making Taiwan a military issue? Let Taiwan and China figure it out. They don't want war. They want prosperity. Let's de-escalate. Let's figure out how to have a financial relationship with them that rebuilds the American industrial base. And man, I put that right alongside a Ron Paul block quote about China from the Revolution Manifesto. And I haven't seen any political figure in the country, including any of our favorites right now who are in the legislature, even if it's Massey or Rand or you know, any of the people that we could say are actually on the good guy team. I've never seen anybody say anything like that.
Yeah,
I mean, just don't.
It's remarkable. Like that alone was probably one of the best descriptors I've ever heard of anybody talking about China. I was really happy to see Rand Paul kind of pushing back against it, but he's like a wet paper bag. I still love him, and I still think he's the best senator there. But you know, he's not quite as. He doesn't seem quite as amped up about it. He definitely said, like, oh, you hear everybody in my party beating the war drums for China. But, like, I don't know, man. People can knock RFK all they like, but I think if they really knew how serious this buildup with China is, then they'd be like, oh, that's why it's so important that he's really good on this one issue. And like it should just make everybody's fucking eyebrows go straight through the fucking ceiling when they see there's uniformity amongst everybody. Nobody questions the China policy other than a handful of people, like you said, the good guys. Nobody questions that. Nobody questions the Israel stuff. That's the stuff you should question the most. And people say, oh, well, Democrats are good on China. No, there's no Democrats good on China. George Santos is like one of the only, and he's a Republican. He's a Republican from New York. He's been the only one that called out and said, I will vote against a war with Taiwan. Him, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, it's about the only ones you're going to depend on to stop a fucking war with China. Like, that is harrowing to think about.
Yeah, and I have a piece I recommend people take a look at that puts all the rhetoric from military commanders and the secretaries of the different branches together, as well as some of the worst hawks in Congress and Biden himself and the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, where they are saying that, for one thing, strategic ambiguity is dead. And we are preparing to go to war with China, and we're preparing to win that war. And that is where that is the whole shift, that our whole national security states, raison d'etre now, is going to war with China. And that is the excuse for the nearly $1 trillion yearly defense budget at this point. We're very close to $900 billion. Robert Higgs, the great Austrian economist, always says you can just take that nominal budget, good rule of thumb, you can multiply it by 2 to see the real figure. At least if you could just put the numbers together, we're spending at least $1.5 trillion right now on the national security state per year. And China, as you know, is always the excuse. We have a former vice president from Raytheon, Lloyd Austin, of course, walks off the board of directors at Raytheon. And but no, the Secretary of the Air Force is Frank Kendall, is a former VP over there. And his whole thing is, I have 3 priorities: China, China, China. We're going to get military equipment that could scare the hell out of China. And it's like, oh yeah, I wonder who's going to get those contracts too. And it's all about that. It's just about petty career advancement and backdoor deals, and then this neoconservative ideology that is the worst, the enemy of the American people. We are not supposed to be an empire. We are not supposed to be giving up all of our futures and our finances and our liberty and our freedom and our and our future generations we're not supposed to be sacrificing all of this at the altar of the American empire and the military industrial complex. But that's exactly what Biden represents. And finally, we have a Democrat who is saying that. And that's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing. And not only that, he's taken the fight to big pharma in a way that no Republican can. If you look at, like, if it does come down to RFK Jr. versus Trump and COVID comes up, there is no fucking way Trump can outdo him there on that issue. There's just none.
I'm sure you've seen Trump has taken the losing side on COVID every single time he brings it. Even with DeSantis, of all people, you think Trump would kind of like dust that under the rug and not say anything about it. But then he'll say, like, I'm pretty sure, like, word for word, he said New York handled COVID better than Florida. Like, you will lose that battle 10 times out of 10 if that's how you want to go for it. But then DeSantis is like a wet paper bag too. He has no charisma or anything like that.
Oh God.
But yeah,
which is hilarious. And it's wonderful to see because he's such a horrible person. And he really would be it would be a throwback to W. Bush, not even with any pretense.
Oh yeah, no. Hey, no, trust me. Everybody keeps saying he voted against Syria. So we can trust him. We can trust him. Now, like, the only L I'll throw at Thomas Massey is for trying to show some anti-war thing. Oh, look how good DeSantis has been on the Middle Eastern wars. I'm like, Massey, please don't do this to me. You're gonna break my heart, dude.
Speaking of oh God, I wish right wingers read Daniel Larison. Larison has that great piece at Responsible Statecraft going through just what a DeSantis foreign policy would look like. In fact, I think that's what the article's called. But you're talking about ramping up of tensions with everyone from North Korea to Venezuela,
especially
Iran. China. And Iran. Oh my God. I mean, that's the other thing too, with Kennedy and his Israel policy and his Iran policy. It's deplorable. However, it really isn't different from anybody he's running against in his own party or in the Republican Party. So you would have a status quo. It would be our support for Israel might be the worst thing that we do, in all honesty. It reflects so poorly on us that we would fund this genocide and this generational mass murder of these people, taking their land, taking their lives, taking everything that they have, and then penning them up in these like Bantustan, and then bombing them and demolishing their homes and shooting them and torturing them and subjecting them to indefinite detention and all these horrible things. At the same time, when it comes to Kennedy's policy about that, like I say, it's not different from anybody's running against. And even with the Iran thing, when he put out that tweet, it was so fucking stupid. Even as much as I really support him, but it was just, Elie Wiesel said never again. And now he's talking about Iran's nukes or their potential for getting nukes, which they have not. We already discussed they've never attempted to build nukes, and Israel has hundreds probably of nuclear weapons.
And we cannot talk about that.
Dozens and dozens. No, and then and it's all a lie. I mean, that's all the whole nuke narrative about Iran. This is all, the Israeli lobby especially. And so they work with the MEK, as Gareth Porter shows, to forge those documents to show that they even had this phantom nuclear weapons program. But beyond that, when he does, he doesn't have an Israel policy. He doesn't have an Iran policy. When you listen to him, it basically sounds like he's just saying, well, I support Israel. And I don't know if that's because he's scared of the lobby, that Rabbi Shmuley that they sicked on him, who used to be funded by Sheldon Adelson. And so I don't know if he's just playing along with that or if he really is a Zionist. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's the latter. But at the same time, he doesn't have an Iran policy either. So if Biden did make this interim deal that did stave off the worst of what could occur, in the event of an overt Israeli strike, which would start a war that would be worse than Afghanistan and Iraq, which I do think they're legitimately concerned about, and there's good reason to be. If he does cut this deal with Iran, where basically there would be limited sanctions relief, they can export $1 billion. A million barrels of oil per day and get access to tens of billions. I think it's like $20 billion in these frozen assets in the IMF and in South Korea and in Iraq. If they can do that, and it does sort of it gives Iran some breathing room with already their oil sales to Asia. They get some limited sanctions relief here, and it does stop a war from occurring. I don't see Kennedy as being like a guy like Trump who would come in and then tear all that up. Like, he's against the JCPOA, but he's against it because no one supports the JCPOA. And that's the stupidest policy from our entire government, practically, because it is the only good thing Obama did, really, apart from working toward, normalizing relations with Cuba. But the JCPOA thing, all it did really was take war off the table with Iran. We knew they weren't making nukes, and this was just a way of absolutely verifying it, double, triple verifying it, and showing that there is no reason for Israel to start this war. Okay, everybody, can we move on from this? And Rand Paul is a better advocate for the JCPOA than any Democrats in Congress that I'm aware of, and he has been. I mean, he has gotten into debates with Robert Malley, who has been Biden's special envoy for Iran, where he's like to the left of Malley, who helped negotiate the JCPOA.
I remember Rand Paul. Now, this was a while ago. He used to be pretty bad on the Iran deal. Like, he was championing against it. So he's pivoted on that.
Yeah, it was last year. It was after.
I believe
it was after the Israel, and I don't think it had anything to do with this, but it was around the time Israel launched their pretty unprecedented assassination campain in Iran.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, they were poisoning a bunch of people.
Yeah, and drone striking military facilities, and the MEK was they had murdered an IRGC colonel in his driveway on just guys on motorcycles, just shot him to death in his car, and taking credit for it, basically, unofficially in the press. And so Rand got into, what it was like a Senate Foreign Relations Committee meeting where Malley was testifying, and Malley was saying how I don't think, the chances of us returning to the deal are very low. We'll probably just walk away. And Rand goes, "Why are you increasing sanctions?" And Rand's like, What do you mean? Like, you say you want to change Iran's behavior, but you offer them no incentives. Right. You don't really give them an off ramp. He goes, if you want to negotiate, you have to put something on the table. You have to say you will lift sanctions, you will do this. And I'd have to go back and look at the dialogue, but essentially he was positioning himself to the left of Malley, who was basically saying, "Oh yeah, we're not going to return to the deal." And Rand's like, "I don't see a reason why we can't. It looks like you're not doing your job, basically." Right. And so that was good to see, but I haven't seen any Republican or Democrat really going to bat for the JCPOA, and it doesn't make really any sense, except for the fact that, if Biden's administration doesn't want to have anything to do with the JCPOA because they see it as like a third rail, because you imagine what the response would be from the Republicans and the Israel lobby, and every time they got close to it last year and the year before, there were Democrats in Congress out in force telling them that if you do this, you're going to be on the we're going to, that basically saying you support terrorism, this kind of thing, like saying the IRGC is the world's greatest terror organization and all this stuff. And these were like Elaine Loria and other Democrats in the House who were leading these kind of moves and signing all these letters and saying we absolutely oppose any sort of, return to the JCPOA. And so there's just no political advantage there. So I think that's why they're shooting for this interim deal thing. But like I said, I don't see RFK coming in there and ripping that up. And, he especially taken that fight to Big Pharma. There is such a base of people who have just had their lives ruined, whether it's by the COVID regime or just, medications and medical malpractice and these things. And there's really nobody fighting for them in the entire country. To have him come and do that is such a powerful thing. And I think he's going to get a lot more support than people even can imagine right now. So there's just too many things. There's so many things he's great on. And you know what? As far as the Iran-Israel thing goes, I'm not saying he'll ever be good on it or even great. However, when people used to go like, well, maybe Trump will do that, like, I think there's a better chance of getting to nudge Kennedy on some of these things, particularly Iran. Maybe not support for Israel and its occupation of Palestine. Right. But you could probably get somebody in there to explain to him the situation with Iran and why we should return to the JCPOA or why we should begin to lift sanctions here. And so we'll have to see. But I mean, yeah, I really am excited to see what he can do. I think it might be our best shot for a while at kind of putting ourselves, getting off this path to oblivion that we're headed down and down a more sensible path, especially when it comes to foreign policy, but when it comes to just domestic policy and even economic policy. I mean, the way he talks about money, the way he talks about the Federal Reserve, it's very heartening to see. And there's so much crossover with what this guy's doing that it just makes sense. I don't know that the LP is going to put forward somebody that I would rather vote for than him at this point. And so, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I haven't seen any Libertarian Party candidates. I think almost all of them follow me on Twitter, and I'm wholly uninterested. When, we have about the same following as in like me and the presidential candidates, like they're a little bit bigger, but like, sorry guys. Like I've supported the Libertarian candidate for president the last 2 election cycles, but like they were at least out there and like had a presence. I don't see any of that right now. And RFK, as we've kind of covered, he is probably the closest to us with the best foreign policy. And
yeah,
in my mind, he seems the most intellectually honest and willing to have a conversation about all of this stuff versus anybody else. Like, he does not seem like he's 100% set in his ways. And maybe it's naivete, but it literally does seem like he's willing to talk about a lot of these issues. And, like every single time you hear him talk about the vaccine stuff, when he says, show me where I'm wrong, and people just berate him for that, like, no, this is what we do. We have an intellectual conversation. He asks where he's wrong, show him. And, if he doesn't change his mind and he acts like an asshole about it, okay, I'll admit that he's an asshole and he's not willing to change his mind, but like, at least engage with him in an intellectually honest way, because it seems like he's very receptive to that. So, I'm right there with you. I'm excited to see what happens.
It's so funny to see. Hey man, I have to blow my nose really quick if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I'll pause. Okay, apparently, talking about RFK is that exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is so funny to see too how the Democrats just do not know how to handle these third-party candidates. Did you see yesterday Cornel West put out a tweet where he was just opposing the new Cold War with Russia and China, and saying the Democrats are the party of war. They want to strangle Russia and go to war with China.
I don't know anything about him, but I saw that tweet and I'm like, that's pretty fucking good. Yeah, I don't know anything about him, but I was giving that one a thumbs up. I like that one.
Yeah, man. It's so funny. He wants to he's a total leftist. I don't even know how far left he is. But it's funny, like he's like, he wants the US to leave NATO. Like it's just he actually said about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's like, if Brother Kennedy doesn't think that the IDF are killing Palestinian women and children deliberately, then he needs to get off the crack pipe. Like it was great to see. But it was so funny, man, just to see who the Democrats are and who they've been, especially since Trump. Keith Olbermann in the comments on that great Cornel West tweet, which I can't quote the whole thing. He quotes W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's just,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
He goes, fuck off. And Keith Olbermann tells this black guy, this black intellectual, very respected guy. Cornel West can go on the Bill Maher show, he can go on Laura Ingraham, he can go wherever he wants. And even though he is, strongly opposed to, he's compared Barack Obama to Richard Nixon, and he says Richard Nixon is to the left of Barack Obama when it comes to like labor. Well, I forget what it was. I think he might have been talking about healthcare or foreign policy or something. But he's attacked Obama for his drone program, and he's always been a supporter of Palestine and all this stuff. So it's just funny, like he's not a guy you're supposed to talk to like that. Despite his flaws, and there's a lot of things he gets wrong from a libertarian perspective. Sure. But to see this son of a bitch say to him, fuck off, and then quote tweet him and say that, and to see these Democrats who were just like, yeah, Keith, and his point is like, you're doing Trump's dirty work for him, like by running as a third party candidate. Like, how dare you? It's so funny to see. And they do not know how to deal with somebody like Kennedy either. We saw him give his speech at Pork Fest, And he talked about the CIA and the Pentagon's involvement in America's biowarfare program and ultimately in the whole COVID pandemic. That speech has been uploaded to YouTube. I recommend everybody check it out. It's on I believe it's on like the Free State Project's official YouTube channel, and it is just phenomenal. He got up there with no notes and just gave this incredible speech. By the end of it, you wanted to throw Avril Haines in prison. It's spectacular. And there's just if the American people hear that, and they are hearing him, he's doing all these podcasts and Rogan's show and everything, getting all these great responses. They just, and like when that Dr. Hotez, what's his name?
Peter Hotez, I think.
Peter Hotez.
Yeah.
That was just like, the worst kind of like own goal you can imagine. Like the guy just completely humiliated himself, and what was the worst kind of backfiring in this sort of PR campaign against him.
Yeah.
They do not know how to handle this stuff anymore. The Democrats have gotten so bad and people hate them so much. All they can do is rely on this anti-Trump sentiment, this anti-Russia sentiment. And I don't know, man. I don't think that I think there's going to be a lot of Trump supporters, a lot of Republicans who are going to want to support Kennedy instead this time. And who knows what'll happen with Biden, if he'll even be able to run, to be honest. But if it does come down to anybody else other than the incumbent versus Kennedy, first of all, I think there's some polls that show that Kennedy has a higher approval rating and a lower disapproval rating than any candidate running in either party. And so, yeah, or at least there's at least one poll that shows that. It might have been from The Economist.
Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, if you put him up against like Gavin Newsom or somebody, whoever they have on their bench, I don't think there's any way that guy, any of them, can compete with Kennedy.
Yeah, I don't think the Democrats definitely want to get rid of Biden. I think they saw him as kind of a good puppet to kind of hang in the wind, but I think they're about done. They found their use for him and want to kind of kick him to the curb. But yeah, they definitely do not want to go toe to toe with Kennedy, because as we've covered throughout the show, he knows what he's talking about. And if they got to go toe to toe with him, he will walk all over them without a second thought, without hesitation. So I think they're kind of looking at him the same way the Republican Party looked at Trump, and probably to a larger degree Ron Paul. Like, I know everybody says Trump wasn't supposed to win, but he won, and then he did generally what the empire wanted anyways. And they never blanked him out of all the polls. They blanked Ron Paul out, though, right? They made sure Ron Paul wouldn't win. Trump won. Ron Paul didn't. Now, who do you think was a bigger threat to the establishment? Trump or Ron Paul? I think RFK, in this respect, for the Democrats, is more of a threat than like Bernie Sanders was. He's kind of looked at kind of like the Ron Paul of the left. I think RFK is like a step above Bernie Sanders in that respect, as in he actually, like, RFK seemingly has integrity and is much better on all of the issues. And I think he captures a lot more of like everybody rather than just like one party or the other. I think he just has a really, really wide appeal. So yeah, people can knock him, but I'm rooting for him. I really am. And I think he's a great candidate. I think he's very, very well spoken. And plus, it is pretty cool to see the first president like jacked. If he's on steroids, I don't give a fuck. Dude looks fucking great for being almost 70. I don't give a fuck.
Well, that's another thing too. I mean, like it's so it's not even superficial, honestly, because look, Biden is this. It would be one thing if Biden was just an older guy, but Biden is. Everybody knows he's a walking corpse. Yeah. He's not all there, and everybody has known that for you. Even when he was campaigning, it was obvious that he was really losing his marbles. And this is not a guy who's been ever known to be a smart fella. Biden was always dumb and always thought to be kind of a clown and a liar and an ignoramus and sort of just an angry, bellicose, corrupt son of a bitch. And now to see him going into this comatose state, it's just, he does, in a way, I mean, he's the perfect personification of what has happened to the American ruling class or the American empire. But to contrast him with Kennedy, it really is something. And just him being in such great shape and being so articulate and so passionate and erudite, it really is just the complete polar opposite. And the other thing, too, that I noticed when we were seeing him in PorcFest, again, despite the fact that he's not a Ron Paulian, The real interesting thing about Ron Paul to me was he do you remember when they used to make those compilation videos of Ron Paul speeches and they would play Don McLean's American Pie behind him?
Mm-mm.
Like, bye bye, Miss American Pie.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about Ron Paul, and when you read his books, it's not like when you read, well, you could get this if you read certain Rothbard books or certain libertarian books, but specifically Ron was able to make, despite the fact that he was telling you, and we have all come to know just the worst things about the American corporatocracy, our ruling class, our military, our intelligence apparatus, the millions of people that have been killed, all these horrible crimes against the working class, against the middle class with our central bank, and just the absolute devastation of our economy, and how the corrupt nature of all these bureaucracies being controlled by the most powerful corporations, and how they use the regulations to just completely devastate small businesses and basically destroy them through compliance costs and all these different horrible ways that the oligarchy is able to crush, independent businessmen, basically.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very, very long time, and they run awesome cells and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got red velvet cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180 calories. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important. So make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
But Ron was able to make you proud to be an American.
Yeah.
He was able to tap into that that Declaration of Independence spirit, which is that's my favorite aspect of like classical liberalism, is just that. It's like when we were back in New Hampshire. I was born in Massachusetts, so I'm getting a little bit like just driving through there out of the Manchester airport, just looking around like, yeah, I feel like I'm home. And then that was the thing I really felt at PorcFest, and I've always felt that when I went to like my first Mises Institute event. It's like, God damn, like I'm proud to be a libertarian. I love being around these people. And Ron can make you proud to be an American. And, it's not like the Kennedys have a great record. However, Robert F. Kennedy he's a very, as I say, erudite guy with this great classical education. He is able to tap into that classical liberal, that American history, and he's able to evoke these emotions in the audience that is very similar to Ron Paul. Right. Where he can actually make you proud to be American. You know what? One of the things he said in his speech that really got me, he's talking about setting up the CIA after World War II. And he tells this audience, he goes, you know how anti-American that is? We're not East Germany. We're not the Soviet Union. We don't have a Stasi. We don't do this. And it's just, he goes, this is verboten in a free society. You don't do it. And that's the kind of thing Ron Paul used to say, right. And he still does, but man, dude, when he gives these speeches, it's really interesting. And for Kennedy to be able to do that with people, I think again is going to be very important. I'm not the most patriotic guy in the world. I was joking around with somebody the other day that like, I have very few reasons to be proud to be an American anymore. Music is one of the main ones. I think, I think you and I both have that in common, but Ron Paul is able to get that out of me. And I think Kennedy will be able to as well. And I think that's really important. And as good as Dave Smith could have been if he ran, I don't know if he would have been able to pull that out. I don't know that the American people would have responded in that way that they did with Ron. Right. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like a subconscious thing, or if it has to do with aesthetics, or if it really does come down to rhetoric. But I think it's just something very unique, and the American people could use that because, as I say, not just for me, there's a lot of people looking around and they're running out of reasons to be proud to be an American.
Right.
And I do understand that instinct, especially being in New Hampshire, of wanting to just secede and get the hell out of this thing, you know? And, you know, I think that, you know, someone asked him a question about that. And actually was, I forget what her name is, but asking all the questions at the end of his speech.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked him about that, you know, how the Free Staters, if we decided to, you know, secede, would you exercise violence against us, you know, to prevent that?
Mm-hmm.
And he made a crack about Taiwan. He goes, well, I think my policy would be the same as it is with China over Taiwan. Let's call it strategic ambiguity. It was very funny. And but then he followed that up by saying, we can always figure that out. He's like, you know, he's like, I don't know, I'm gonna do something like that. But listen, he goes, but I want you people to be proud of your country again. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people do want. I mean, as I say, I am not a nationalist, but I understand not wanting to live in a country that you think could be good, but is horrible, that is doing horrible things at home and abroad. No one wants that. And you know what, man? He talks about, I think he might have brought this up. He certainly brought up the fact that we spend $1.5 trillion a year on the empire. And he talked about the peace dividend, and he said how that destroys the middle class. And God, to have a Democrat saying that is just fantastic. But I think he also brought up the cost of war study that came out from Brown University recently that showed that in the post 9/11 war zones, at least it's a conservative estimate, 4.5 million people have been killed, or directly or indirectly, as a result of the devastation of just health services and infrastructure and all these things. And that, you know, telling the American people that and saying that there's another way we can choose peace, we can choose to be, you know, a nation we can be proud of, to be at peace with the world. And as he says, you know, to have economic collaboration with these other countries instead of animosity and acrimony and brinksmanship, we can actually turn around and do the right thing here. And, you know, the way he talks about the situation in Ukraine, it's just indispensable to have somebody with that much of a platform, as long as you do something to get rid of that, to talk to the American people directly and in a straightforward, honest way about how we got here. It's very valuable in a way that I don't even know if we could have possibly had a better option in the LP right now. And so, it's the first time I've really talked about the Kennedy thing publicly. I am very, cautiously optimistic, as I am with anything. As I said, I've only ever voted against John McCain before he died. And I voted to legalize pot in Arizona, and voted against Sheriff Joe Arpaio. He's just a local tyrant. But no, I haven't voted since, and I never felt I had a reason to. I don't like it, to be honest with you. But I'm probably going to vote for this guy if he can get into the general. And I'm just very excited. And I think it's a big opportunity, just like it was with Ron Paul. I think it's a big opportunity for us. I think it's a big opportunity for people who are nominally or ostensibly on the fringes in political discourse in America to all of a sudden now have a voice. And especially for independent media and guys like us with our shows, and you write for the Institute, and I with your great piece about Miles Guo and the China Hawks and Steve Bannon and all, it's important to have somebody. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is putting out tweets where he's pulling up Dave DeCamp articles from antiwar.com.
He's
showing,
the only
speech at the UN,
only candidate to refer to antiwar.com like that. That's when I hear people bitch about them, they miss this point. This is our first opportunity in a long time after the Trump era to now finally extend a hand out to dissident left-wingers who feel the same way about us on a whole host of issues, who felt completely fucked by the Democrats when it came to the COVID response and stuff like that. This is now their chance to say, this is our guy, and stick their heads up above the water, and now we can all meet them and maybe make compromises in a reasonable fashion along the way. That is the whole point of this. It's not just Kennedy's a big deal, but there's so much to this moment in particular. And people who want to say, oh, I had somebody tell me that, oh, Obama was good on war too before he got elected. Like, come on, dude. You just have
it's
a
very
little,
different thing.
have a little bit of humility, have a little bit of patience, and have a little bit of optimism. And this is the same person who also told me that I'd be wrong about DeSantis being a neocon, which is absolutely yeah. Just I can't stand the people who you can only have positive feelings about people on the right and not people on the left. I have positive feelings about people on both sides. When I see somebody who's good on the left, I'm going to say that. When I see somebody who's good on the right, I'm going to say that. If they're right on an issue, I'm going to say that. I'm not some partisan circle jerking dude. I think that is the lamest, most retarded shit ever, to sit there and just omit all the bad things that the people you like do and only speak about their good, or vice versa. I think that's so lame. If we're going to be anybody, if we're going to be anything, we need to be unabashedly libertarians who are outspoken and speak to our values and praise people when they're good and scold them when they're bad, and put forth our values and give a positive vision for people rather than just constantly tell them what's wrong with them or what's wrong with the world. We have to lead with a positive vision and say, we are anti-war, pro-peace, pro-humanity people who just want to see the best for people and let them have the most autonomy in their own lives so they can make their own decisions about how they can prosper. That's what I think we need to be as libertarians. We don't need to be partisan hacks for DeSantis, Trump, or even RFK or Biden or anybody like that. We need to be unabashedly libertarian and very, very vocal about that. And anything less, to me, I think it's just bullshit, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, and I do think that it is just, it's a wonderful opportunity. People talk about like shifting the Overton window. Well, this is like literally changing the fabric of the whole Democratic Party.
Exactly.
And there just is no analog to this guy on the right wing right now. Right. There just isn't. It could have been. I mean, if we had I think we should have had, it would have been, if he wasn't running, what we would want is the LP candidate or somebody who's like as good as like to have, I don't know, Judge Knapp or somebody, or Spike Cohen or some, great libertarian exegete running in the Republican Party and just, changing the discourse. And it probably be more, you probably could get more traction now than even Ron Paul did, just in the sense of at least changing the discourse among the candidates. Because if you have, it's just the movement is bigger now. And people are hungry for some dissent against the system, and they can feel that hypocrisy. They can sense it, especially when it's someone like DeSantis who has this like very like, negligent or negligible differences with the Democratic Party when it comes to even things like Ukraine.
It's very faux dissent.
Yeah, it's very just completely it's minuscule ultimately, because he's just as bad of a hawk as Biden is on all these different countries. And and they're really, quite honestly, it's like Biden's policy on North Korea has been worse than Trump's was. And you could argue the same thing about his Iran policy. And DeSantis would try and be worse than Biden because Biden's a Democrat and Biden's weak and feckless and has to always be, no matter how bad he is. And to have someone like Kennedy in there doing this, I just think it's changing the whole national conversation if we handle this the right way. And it's just, I mean, to have someone just saying no to the whole the buildup for war with China. Who said we were building up for war with China? Because that's like no one is saying that. And so to have him do that, it is just a phenomenal opportunity, because now we're having a real discussion. We're having a real discussion about big pharma and the corruption at the FDA and things like this. And to have someone who really sees the COVID regime as a totalitarian aberration that should never have happened in a free society, which is a stronger position than you get from any of the Republican candidates.
Absolutely.
And so, and DeSantis can talk a good game all he wants. I mean, this is a guy who's really walking the walk. And like I said, that speech was incredible. I mean, this is a guy who is going to kind of we can go to war with the establishment here in a real way, not in a fake way with Trump, where he's clearly speaking out of both parts of his mouth. And he's, because even when I was watching Trump run in 2016, I was like, because I did grow up on Fox News, like I can pick the neocon propaganda and the talking points out very easily. And I was like, you want to expand the surveillance state. You want to torture people. You want to bomb the shit out of ISIS, Israel, Iran. And like the worst deal in history and all this. And he's horrible on Israel, but again, like, I think if anybody can have his mind changed on that, it's probably him. And so we can try on that. But yeah, there's just too many things that I think there is real common ground with libertarians on. And regardless, just having people saying the things that he's saying now, it opens a lot of doors. And quite frankly, we needed somebody at his level to come out and say these things, especially about Ukraine, because I hate using the term normies, but they're not hearing, unfortunately, what Ron and Dan are saying, or what Dave DeCamp is saying, or what Scott is saying, or what all of our great libertarian friends are saying, and all the great leftist writers, that we all read and shows we listen to. Unfortunately, I think we're all still in this sort of anti-war echo chamber, but now that's going to be opened up in a way that it just hasn't been, because the Democratic Party has been so completely mind fucked by Russiagate, especially. And the Republican Party is starting those on a constituents level. I do have some faith. I used to be much more cynical about Republicans. But at the same time, their rejection of this Ukraine policy is very heartening, because they're trying very hard to get them all on board for it. If you look at Fox News or Fox Business now, I mean, even Fox Business, it's funny. They're like they're like the least bad cable news channel, but they're so hawkish.
I was gonna say that's not saying much.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's so hard to watch. But it is funny. I mean, that is not the feeling in the heartland. No one wants to, destroy Russia and go to war with China. The thing is, they're not being told what the real policy is, especially with China. All they can do is scare us about China. They can't get the American people to want to go to war with China.
And so you got to manufacture the consent.
Exactly. And it's not amplified. That's what's so enraging about this slow motion. It's not even why it is. I guess it's slow motion train wreck, but it seems like it's going real fast. But they can scare the hell out of people about China. Oh my God, this balloon, we gotta do something. We gotta scramble jets. But I think they can only scare you about China. They can't scare you into wanting to go to war with China. And so that I'm happy about. And I think that I've always thought that if the Republicans could see that this is Obama's project and that Biden is the one taking us to war here when it's not necessary, I thought then they just don't know. I really do believe that. So to have this guy who they agree with on all these other things saying that, man, that's a big deal, because no one's going to tell the American right the truth in their own leadership. And we've seen that, like we were talking about with Gates. Like, he's trying to scare you that he was talking about some infrastructure project that they were building in, I forget what country it was, in Central America or South America, but he got up and yelled at Congress and he on the floor, and he's going, have we forgotten about the Monroe Doctrine? So
my grandchildren will be speaking Mandarin.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, dude.
Yeah, and so it'll be great to see somebody, changing the conversation. That's really all that needs to happen. And I think it's going to be exciting, so we'll have to see. But I am rooting for Biden tripping and falling and something happening here, because if we can get it, and you know what, they probably do want to get rid of him. I think they really are doubtful. The scary thing is, I bet you they would rather have Trump or DeSantis win rather than give it up to Kennedy. But maybe they won't. Maybe they see it as like, well, it's probably the best thing for the party if we can get, because and I'm not an expert on like internal Democratic Party politics, but I do know that there are some inklings that people realize that their approach for the last several years is starting to have a lot of diminishing returns.
Right.
That the American people are not responding well to, quite frankly, their support for all these wars at the same time that they're just woke and confrontational with so many of their own constituents. And that's kind of causing a huge problem. And people know the economy is, they know the they don't understand enough to say that Trump is also just as responsible for this inflation, but they do know that Biden is making it worse.
Right.
And so
I
think very important.
I think this is where the door opens for someone like DeSantis, because he's an established, he can play both sides of the fence because he was a huge dissident when it came to COVID, but he's still very, very establishment if you look throughout his congressional career. So he can pull both people. But this is kind of what Trump did. Trump originally was a very dissident candidate, but then as soon as he got in, he joined right in with a certain wing of the establishment and did whatever they wanted. So he gets to play both sides of the fence too. So I don't know, man. In that respect, Kennedy really is the only one that you could say, I don't know. Would he line up with the establishment? I don't know. Maybe he would. I would cautiously say he wouldn't, but that's the only one that he may or may not. I don't think Trump's going to go on some grand revenge tour. I think that's absolutely silly. Anybody who thinks that hasn't learned their lesson, because Trump doesn't learn anything. He just continues on his own path. DeSantis, an establishment guy. He wants it to be his establishment. He doesn't want the boot off your neck. He wants his boot on your neck, right? Those goofy white boots that he was wearing in the rain. Biden, he's a walking corpse. It's going to do, he's just going to let Jake Sullivan run the State Department. And that's pretty much who's running the government now. And then Gavin Newsom's just like one of those lizard people, pro-lockdowns, the most awful Democrat you could possibly imagine. And you have RFK, who's like a fucking 90s Democrat, but is just much, much better on war and isn't afraid to take on big banks, big pharma, and all that stuff. So if you ask me, the only person who's polling seriously out of all those people who might actually pose a threat to the establishment is Kennedy, in my mind. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and if you need any encouragement that we're right about this, we were when we were in New Hampshire driving to the airport, we listened to a podcast of Barry Weiss interviewing and covering Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And it was so funny to hear her introduction, because he has these baseless conspiracies about how the CIA killed her, his uncle and his father. And she's just complaining about all these different things she hates about Kennedy. And then she goes, the one thing I really like about him is his Israel policy. And so, like, if
tell me she did. She really said that.
Yes. She goes, it's a welcome change from the progressive caucus and the squad.
Oh my God.
It was so funny. It was so, you could not have written that as a sketch. People would have gone, yeah, man, that's too obvious. Come on, Barry Weiss is going to say that the only thing she likes about RFK Jr., So it was funny. She was trying to dampen any sort of support or optimism for him, except for that aspect, really. At least from what I heard like the first half hour of the podcast. But yeah, I mean, look, that part of the establishment, that war hawk neocon, part of that of the progressive wing, they do not support him. They want essentially a continuation or some. I don't even know. I mean, Barry Weiss is such a weird character, to be honest with you. I don't listen to her that much, but I want to see people like hers voices to be, blacked out by, or just completely drowned out by people who think more like this guy, who think that we need to end this damn proxy war in Ukraine and completely pull back our troops and bases and stop this path towards brinksmanship with China. And, he's talking about completely rewriting, going back to the post-Cold War drawing board. And like he said, having our peace dividend. And he knows that we started all these wars in the Middle East and launched both new Cold Wars against Russia and China. And this was led by the neocons, sort of epitomized in the Project for a New American Century crew and their ancillaries and fellow travelers. And so he knows who the enemy is, and he knows what they did, and he wants to change it. Someone should tell him that they're all Likudniks, basically. They're all, Israel firsters too. But other than that, man, just the fact that he's saying all that stuff as a foreign policy guy, I am just, I'm pretty, I'm stoked to see what he can do. I think it's going to be very healthy. It's like white blood cells rushing toward an infection. You just want to get more of them, as many as possible.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. So I've kept you a little over time, man. I always love talking to you. We have our little group chat and we always shoot the shit. So as always, it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. Go ahead, give your plugs and anything you got going on cool that you want people to know about. Feel free to let her loose, and then hang around for a few minutes after and send me all those links so I can put them in the description so that everyone can check that stuff out, especially that one piece that ran in the Ron Paul Institute.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're going to Kyle and myself and Scott and Keith are going to Freedom Fest tomorrow, and we'll be there, I think, through Saturday or something. And we'll be at the Libertarian Institute antiwar.com table. So everybody just come by and hang out. We'd love to see you. Of course, plugs. I got the Libertarian Institute. All my articles are going to be running the featured articles section, the news section there. Kyle and I and Will are putting out articles every day. And then we do conflicts of interest, which is our show. We do 3 or 4 shows every week. And Kyle and I do one show a week, and together we cover for all the worst news across the empire, whatever the empire is doing, from South America to Northeast Asia. So just check that out. And yeah, and I'm also writing news at antiwar.com on a regular basis too. So you'll see me there in the news section. And yeah, I'm on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96. And our show is on all the podcast apps, Kyle and my show, and we're on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, all that. So just check us out. And again, man, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you for all the work you're doing. You're easily one of my favorite people in the whole fucking movement, and I think I tell everybody that I know, like, who's a libertarian, like, you got to hear this guy's show. He is one of our best guys on China. It's amazing. And honestly, dude, it's just, man, it's so great to have a buddy in the movement who's pushing that, who's fighting that same battle, because even in our movement there's not enough people talking about the China stuff. But once you learn enough about it, you're just like, I got to do something about this. In fact, that's how I started writing for the Institute on a regular basis, because I was reading Dave DeCamp and listening to Robbie Martin and getting the shit scared out of me in 2020, actually. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's it's just fantastic. And I love talking to you. So thank you so much.
No, dude, feelings very, very mutual. And, as I told you before, you, Dave DeCamp, Pat McFarland, Peter Schiff, Kyle Anzalone, and all you guys over there have been a big inspiration on me, and have given me all the knowledge I need to kind of talk about this stuff professionally, and it's allowed me to go on other shows and spread the good gospel, and hopefully kind of open people's eyes up to what's going on with China and Taiwan. So hell yeah, man, we'll definitely do it again. If you got anything else, we'll close her out, man.
No, I think we're good, man. This is great, and yeah, let's do it again soon.
Absolutely, man. All right, everybody, thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.